You reach for something sweet without thinking about it. A spoonful of something, a square of chocolate, a sip of something sugary. It happens almost automatically, a small reward you barely register as a decision. The whole action takes less than 3 seconds. But for most of human existence, sugar in any concentrated form was one of the rarest things a person could find. Not inconvenient, not expensive, genuinely almost absent from the landscape for most of the year. Your ancestors spent hundreds of thousands of years chasing it down, risking real physical danger for it, sometimes going years without tasting anything close to it. And the craving you feel right now, that pull towards something sweet, that reflex that makes a meal feel incomplete without a little sugar at the end, that is ancient. That is not a preference. That is a biological instruction written into your nervous system before your species had a name for itself. The question is, when did we figure out how to answer it reliably? For over 300,000 years. Homo sapiens lived without sugar as a substance they could store, refine, or carry with them. They had no plantations, no refineries, no jars of syrup sealed against spoilage. What they had was a brain built to crave concentrated calories and a landscape that offered them only in scattered, dangerous seasonal bursts. A patch of ripe fruit here, a wild beehive there, guarded by thousands of stinging insects. That was it. Your brain needs glucose to function. Not wants, needs. It is the only fuel your neurons can reliably run on, and your brain alone consumes roughly a fifth of your entire body's energy budget every single day, even though it is only about 2% of your body weight. Without adequate glucose, cognition degrades fast. Concentration fails, mood collapses, coordination suffers. A brain that runs low on fuel is a brain making worse decisions at exactly the moment survival depends on making good ones. Your body knows this, it has always known this, so it built in an alarm system, a craving so specific and so rewarding when satisfied that you can feel its pull right now, sitting wherever you are. Ancient humans felt that alarm constantly, and for most of their existence they had no reliable way to answer it, which raises a question researchers have spent decades investigating. Not just when did humans start eating sugar, but when did they start going out of their way, taking on real risk, to find it? The first clue doesn't come from a laboratory. It comes from watching newborns. In the 1970s, researcher Jacob Steiner documented something remarkable in infants only hours old, before any learning could possibly have shaped their preferences. A drop of sweet liquid on the tongue produced an immediate, unmistakable expression of pleasure, relaxed features, a hint of a smile. A drop of something bitter produced the opposite, an instant grimace of rejection. No infant had to be taught that sugar was good. The preference arrived pre-installed, because throughout evolutionary history, sweetness was one of the most reliable signals in the entire natural world that a food was calorie-dense and safe to eat. Almost nothing naturally sweet is poisonous. Almost everything naturally bitter carries some risk. A brain that craved sweetness and avoided bitterness from the very first taste was a brain with a real survival advantage, and that wiring did not evolve for you specifically. It evolved for a world your ancestors actually lived in, a world where sweetness was scarce enough that following it never once led them astray. Your ancestors watched other animals chase the same signal, and they learned from it. Chimpanzees have been observed stripping bark and fashioning simple tools specifically to extract honey from wild hives, tolerating dozens of stings in the process because the caloric reward is worth the pain. Bears across multiple continents will travel significant distances and risk serious injury to raid a hive. And in parts of Africa, something even stranger developed, a genuine working partnership between humans and a wild bird. The greater honeyguide, a small bird found across sub-Saharan Africa, has a call specifically adapted to attract human attention and lead people toward wild beehives it cannot access on its own. In 2016, researcher Claire Spottiswoode of the University of Cambridge published detailed findings on this relationship among Yao honey hunters in Mozambique, documenting a genuine two-way communication system. Honey hunters produce a distinctive trilling call to signal they are ready to follow, and the bird responds by leading them, sometimes for over a kilometer, flying ahead and calling back until it reaches a hive. The humans smoke out the bees, break open the hive, take the honey, and leave wax and larvae behind for the bird, which cannot digest honey itself but thrives on the leftover comb. This was not a myth or a folk tale. It was measured, recorded, statistically verified cooperation between two different species, built entirely around the shared, ancient pull toward a rare and valuable food source. For hundreds of thousands of years, the strategy for finding sugar in any form was built entirely around this kind of vigilance. Watch the animals. Watch the birds. Learn the fruiting seasons of every tree in a home range, and return to each one exactly when it ripened. Follow a honeyguide's call without hesitation, because it was pointing toward one of the densest, most valuable calorie sources the landscape had to offer. This strategy worked, but it came with a brutal limitation. Sweetness in nature is almost never permanent. Ripe fruit rots within days. A wild hive, once robbed, takes months to rebuild its stores. The reward was real, but it was never reliable, and that unreliability is precisely what kept the cravings so sharp. A pull that could always be satisfied on demand would never have needed to evolve into anything as intense as what you still feel today. Picture a small group of early humans, perhaps 20 people, moving through what is now northern Tanzania, roughly 60,000 years ago. It is late in the dry season, and food has been thin for weeks. A sharp, chattering call sounds from a nearby acacia tree. Unmistakable, urgent, deliberately repetitive. A man who has followed this exact call dozens of times in his life recognizes it instantly and answers with a low whistle. The bird flits from branch to branch ahead of the group, calling, waiting, calling again, leading them nearly a kilometer through dry scrub until it lands and falls silent beside a gnarled baobab. High in a hollow of the trunk, a wild hive hums. The group builds a small smoking fire beneath it, using dried grass and green leaves, sending thick smoke up into the hollow to calm the bees. One climbs, tolerating stings along both arms, and pries free heavy combs dripping with dark honey. The children are given pieces first. The taste is intense, immediate, unlike anything else in their ordinary diet, and their bodies respond with something closer to relief than pleasure. They eat as much as they safely can that day, because there is no way to preserve what remains. By evening, the hive is nearly empty, and the group moves on, carrying nothing but the memory of exactly where this tree stood, filed away for the next season the bird might lead them back. That was the rhythm of sugar for most of human history. Find it, eat all of it immediately, because it will not keep. Move on. The Hadza of Tanzania, one of the last populations on Earth still living substantially by hunting and gathering, offer a living window into exactly how central this rhythm remained. Anthropologist Alyssa Crittenden, who has spent years studying Hadza diet directly in the field, documented that honey can account for as much as 15% of total daily caloric intake among the Hadza during peak season, an extraordinary figure for a single wild food source, rivaling or exceeding the caloric contribution of meat in some months. Frank Marlowe, an anthropologist who conducted extensive fieldwork with the Hadza, noted that honey was consistently ranked among the most preferred foods in the entire Hadza diet, preferred even over meat by many individuals surveyed directly. The Hadza do not have a sugar bowl on the table. They do not reach for anything refined, but their relationship with sweetness is, if anything, more intense and more central to daily survival than yours, because for them the reward still has to be earned through real physical risk every single time. Then, agriculture arrived, and the relationship with sugar began to change permanently, though not in the direction you might expect first. The earliest deliberate cultivation of a genuinely sugar-rich crop appears to trace back to New Guinea, where archaeological and genetic evidence places the domestication of sugarcane at roughly 8 to 10,000 years ago, among some of the earliest plant domestication events anywhere on Earth. This was not accidental foraging. Sugarcane does not spread itself efficiently through natural means, and its domesticated form shows clear signs of deliberate human selection for thicker stalks and higher sugar content over generations. People were not simply finding sweetness anymore. For the first time, they were breeding it into existence. Independent evidence tells a strikingly similar story elsewhere on the planet, arriving at broadly comparable solutions without any possible contact between the groups involved. Rock art at the Cuevas de la Ara site in eastern Spain, dated to roughly 8,000 years ago, depicts a human figure suspended on what appears to be a rope or vine ladder, reaching directly into a wild hive surrounded by a swarm of bees. one of the oldest unambiguous depictions of honey harvesting ever discovered. On an entirely separate continent, indigenous peoples across what is now the northeastern region of North America developed sophisticated techniques for tapping maple trees and reducing the collected sap through controlled boiling into a stable, storable concentrated syrup, a technology that solved the same fundamental problem sugarcane cultivation solved on the other side of the world: how to convert a rare seasonal sweetness into something that could actually be kept. Three unconnected populations, three different plants, three different climates, all converging on the same underlying goal within a comparable span of human history. When a behavior appears independently across separate populations with no possible contact, it usually means the same underlying pressure was acting on all of them. In this case, the pressure was obvious. The craving had never gone away. It had simply been waiting for a technology capable of finally satisfying it on demand. This shift left a mark that survives in the archaeological record in a way sodium never could. Dental researchers studying skeletal remains across the transition from hunting and gathering to settled agriculture have consistently found a sharp rise in tooth decay, coinciding with the adoption of dense, starchy, and eventually sugar-rich diets. Populations that had spent tens of thousands of years with remarkably low rates of cavities show a measurable spike almost precisely when concentrated carbohydrates became a daily staple rather than an occasional seasonal windfall. Teeth, unlike soft tissue, preserve for thousands of years, and they preserve an honest record. They show, with total clarity, the exact moment a food source that used to require real risk and effort became something a person could simply have, day after day, without ever having to earn it. Once sugarcane cultivation reached India, something changed again. By roughly the 4th century, methods had been developed there for boiling and crystallizing cane juice into a solid, storable, tradable form, transforming sugar from a fresh, perishable treat into something closer to what salt had already become centuries earlier, a durable commodity that could be transported, stockpiled, and controlled. From India, refined sugar production spread gradually along established trade routes, reaching the wider world over the following centuries and eventually becoming one of the most economically significant crops in human history, driving the establishment of large-scale plantation agriculture across multiple continents and shaping colonial economies for hundreds of years. The full history of how that plantation system was built and sustained is a heavy one, involving immense human suffering that deserves its own dedicated telling rather than a passing mention here. But the underlying economic driver is worth naming plainly. Sugar had gone from something a person risked bee stings to steal a handful of, to something powerful enough to reorganize entire continents around its production. And then, much like salt before it, something strange happened. Sugar got cheap. Industrial refining, mechanized harvesting, global shipping networks collapsed what had once been a luxury reserved for the wealthy into one of the least expensive substances a modern person can buy. In the span of roughly 200 years, sugar transformed from an item so valuable it was locked away in wealthy households to something added, invisibly and by default, into an enormous share of all packaged food produced anywhere on Earth. Today, a kilogram of refined sugar costs less than a cup of coffee. The scarcity ended completely. The craving did not. The scale of that shift is worth putting in real numbers. Researchers estimating the sugar intake of hunter-gatherer populations, based on seasonal honey and fruit availability, generally place typical consumption somewhere in the range of a few kilograms of concentrated sugar per year, arriving in short, intense, unpredictable bursts rather than a steady daily stream. The average person in the United States today consumes somewhere in the neighborhood of 60 kilograms of added sugar annually, spread across nearly every meal, present in foods that don't even taste distinctly sweet, hidden inside bread, sauces, and processed savory snacks, where a consumer has no reason to expect it. That is not a modest increase. It represents an environment so fundamentally different from the one your reward system evolved inside that the comparison barely holds together as the same category of experience. Your brain's reward system is still calibrated for a world where sweetness signaled something rare and worth real effort. In 2008, researcher Nicole Avena, then working at Princeton University, published influential research demonstrating that intermittent access to sugar produces measurable changes in brain dopamine signaling in the nucleus accumbens, the same core reward pathway implicated in other powerfully reinforcing substances. The relief and pleasure you feel from something sweet is not a metaphor for anything. It is a direct, measurable neurochemical event, your brain rewarding you exactly as it was designed to for finding something it still, on some deep and ancient level, believes might not be there again tomorrow. It has not been informed that the vending machine down the hall is restocked every single week, without fail. You are running ancient software in an environment that has changed faster than evolution can possibly track. The software is doing precisely what it was always built to do: chase concentrated calories, reward you intensely when you find them, and never fully switch off the underlying alarm, because for hundreds of thousands of years, switching it off would have meant losing the drive that once led a hungry group to a hidden hive at exactly the right moment. The alarm is still running. It was calibrated for a world that quietly stopped existing sometime in the last 2 centuries, and nobody sent your nervous system the memo. Sit with that for a moment. Somewhere in what is now Mozambique, a Yao honey hunter is right now answering the call of a wild bird, following it through the bush toward a hive he has never seen, trusting a partnership between species that has likely existed for longer than agriculture itself. He is solving the exact same problem your brain is quietly trying to solve every time you reach for something sweet. He just has to work considerably harder for the answer. The sugar within reach of you right now is the endpoint of a search that lasted the better part of 300,000 years. Your ancestors tasted it in scattered wild fruit and stolen honeycomb, defended by stinging insects and hunted down with the help of a small chattering bird. They learned to grow it, learned to boil it into something that would keep, and built entire economic systems around controlling it once they had. And now it sits there, within arm's reach, unremarkable, in a bowl or a packet or a shelf you walk past without a second thought. The craving is still exactly as sharp as it ever was. The search, for you at least, is simply over. If you made it this far, you're exactly the kind of person this channel exists for. We make videos like this one every week about ancient human behavior, about what your body still remembers, about the gap between the world you were built for and the one you actually live in. If that's something you want more of, hit subscribe. It costs you nothing, and it tells the algorithm that this kind of storytelling is worth keeping alive. See you in the next one.